Hi, everybody. I'm Avery. This is Deb. We are going to be talking about how to evaluate news sites. So although this is for my English 101 class, this can be used for any online research that you're doing for pretty much any purpose. We're going to be taking a look at two different news sites today. And so we're going to first do an overview about how we would look at a news site to evaluate it as credible or not, and really how we would respond to a website. And then, we'll discuss it and just kind of walk you through a couple of articles as well. All right, so first thing we're going to look at is vice.com. So it's election day. So this is what is going to be the focus of both of these news sites that we're going to see today. But you'll probably be able to see some differences. So the first thing that I notice about Vice is the title bar here. So there's the name of the source, there's the 19th in 2020 and the 846 project, which I'm not sure, I wasn't sure what those were, so I decided to take a look at both of them. And so this, the 19th and 2020 section is about the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which granted women the right to vote. So it looks like this is a lot of different stories about voting laws and about how women have gained the right to vote and some of the struggles and challenges that they still face. And then the 846 project is about systemic racism. Earlier in this year, 2020, there were a lot of protests about police brutality against Black folks. And so this is probably a fairly new section for Vice. So as you can see, most of the articles here are about police violence and against people of color.
And a few advertisements.
Yes, and a few advertisements. There's no news source nowadays is free of advertisements unless you have an ad blocker, which I don't right now. So there you'll see ads on both of these sites, although I think it's interesting that they're presented a little bit differently. They appear a little bit differently. So we have these two pages or two sections of the news source, both of which seem to be focused around equity and justice. So that's already telling me that this news source values these things. And so I respond well to this because this is something that's really important to me as well. So I can already tell that I'm going to appreciate this news source because it shares some of my values. So to the big story here, of course, is the election, but I'm also noticing that there are a variety of different categories of news stories. So we have health, we have news, we have world news, entertainment, games. There's, the daily horoscope. I noticed that when I was looking through this, the world news had news stories from a lot of different places in the world. So here's a story from Mexico. I saw a couple of stories from Canada, some from China, I believe, some from Poland, some from the UK. So there are news stories from all different parts of the world, including, you know, the U.S. election. So this site is not solely focused on the election, even on election day. That's a pretty big focus, but you can also find different news stories.
One thing I noticed, Avery, is up on the upper right-hand corner, it says English right now, but they actually have multiple editions from around the world. So you can find it in different languages. And when I looked at a couple of them, they were focusing on stories that were of interest to those countries, but they still had a strong bent toward justice and diversity and diverse peoples and those kind of issues.
Yeah, so it's a global news source, or it's meant to be a global news source. So to me, this site is pretty well designed. It's pretty easy to read, pretty easy to find my way around. There's big tiles and big thumbnails with little snippets that tell me what the story is going to be about, so I know if it's something that I want to read or not. And although the ads are super big, there's not a ton of them. So there's not a lot of like flashing ads around here. There's like, every, scroll of a page, there's maybe one ad. It's big, but there's only one. One thing that I notice about the Vice website is that there are a lot of people of color in the pictures here. Even at the top, in a not directly related to like racial justice or anything, story 23 things to do instead of spiraling over the election, which is meant to be presumably kind of a fun, fluffy thing. A person of color is represented. And I think that that's important because, if it's only a news story about racial justice or, terrorism or whatever, then that presents a certain narrative about people of color, is that they're only represented through tragedy, which is not the way that they need to be represented. But if I'm scrolling through here, there's lots of, different people of color that are represented. And like I was saying earlier about the news stories, lots of different countries represented. So this kind of diversity is what I look for when I look for a credible news source or a credible source of information, because that diversity is important for me. Let's maybe just take a little bit of a closer look at the headlines. So we have stuff about the election. We have 23 things to do instead of spiraling over the election. Robocallers are telling voters in key states to stay home, don't buy it. So did Antifa light this guy's combine fire or what? We have something about the Oregon Trail. So it's kind of fluffy things mixed in with, serious election things. There's the GOP lost their case in Texas, but still got drive-through voting stations closed. There's these Black men were used in a Trump ad without their consent, and families of COVID victims are making a final push for Biden. So to me, these are not super obviously opinionated headlines. There's not a lot of loaded language there. I think it does imply some bias because of what they're reporting on and just the way that they're phrasing this. For the GOP lost their case in Texas, but still got drive-through voting stations closed. The fact that they're reporting on that specifically, that the Republicans closed voting stations, indicates to me that there's some more liberal bias because they're meaning to be critical about that. And likewise, these Black men were used in a Trump ad without their consent. The fact that they're reporting specifically on that is meant to be critical of Trump. So what they're reporting on, what they're representing and not representing represents some bias. And I think one important thing to remember is that bias is not negative or positive. It just means that there's a tendency. Everybody has bias. Like I have a tendency towards more liberal progressive ideas because that's what's important to me. And that's how I view things. That's how I approach the world. So that's my bias. And it seems like Vice has that, the same kind of bias. Let me see, what else were we going to do? We were going to look at the about section, I believe.
Yeah. So one of the things I always do on a website is try to figure out, well, who is this organization? And so Avery just clicked those 3 horizontal lines at the top left corner, and you can see that it's down at the bottom and it's very small, but it says it's about right next to jobs. If you click on that, you go to the next page and you have to click about again. I know it doesn't seem quite intuitive, but just click the word about. And then they do tell you a little bit about the Vice media group. So because Vice it started out as a magazine and in Montreal and then expanded to the US and Canada. And so they tell you a little bit about their history, where they are, their 5 lines of business. So that kind of information is provided here.
Mhm. One
It
thing that I
doesn't,
thought,
it doesn't
go
really
ahead.
say anything about being overly progressive, but you could also look it up on Wikipedia. That'd be a good use of Wikipedia to see if
Mhm.
they talk anything about whether they're kind of a progressive side or they're more conservative side or that kind of thing.
Yeah. And also the media bias chart.
Right, that would.
So one thing that I noticed that was pretty remarkable about their about section is their diversity and inclusion report and their pay equity report. So looking at the diversity and inclusion report, basically there's a letter from the CEO. And so it's giving some kind of demographics of who their staff is, what their diversity and inclusion efforts have been, and what's their important. It's saying that this diversity and inclusion are important aspects of their organization because it is part of their about section. And likewise, the pay equity report. So it's maintaining our standards. Basically, this is saying that here's our demographics. We are striving for equity in the way that we pay our staff. And so again, these are values that I also hold. So I'm also thinking, okay, this is a news source, an information source that I respect because they clearly care about these things.
And I think it's quite unusual to find a news site like this that lays it out so clearly for you.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen a news source that had it this well highlighted.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So do we want to take a look at one of these articles and
Sure.
we'll take another closer look? Okay. Which one do we want to do? Do you want to do robocallers?
We could try that. Yeah. That one
Okay.
came up just today from earlier in this morning when I looked at this site. That suddenly popped up later on. And that goes to something that, you and I have talked about, Avery, which is with news sites, the stories are often changing pretty quickly on their homepage. And so things that you see in the morning might be further down the page as news stories get added. And that can indicate that sometimes stories are being written very quickly and put up on the site. And so one thing you have to be careful of with news sites like this is, how carefully did they check their sources? Because if they're writing things and getting new stories out every hour, that's not a lot of time to follow up on people and track down facts and make sure, they actually said what they said and before they go to publication. So you just have to be careful about that.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true in kind of a fast moving news event like the election or COVID in the first few weeks of March. Pretty much the whole month of March, there was so much information out every day and kind of, you could find some very different information depending on where you were looking. And it was really hard to know what was true because it was just such, an emerging situation and just so much information out there.
And that's going to be true all day today and all evening.
Yes, definitely. So one thing that I'm noticing as I'm scrolling down here is this giant bourbon ad just will not go away. So that's annoying.
Right. It is.
Okay, there it goes. It went away. Good.
Okay, must have been
I think it hurt me.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have in Iowa, residents receive messages telling them to stay home, stay safe, and don't vote. So the first thing I think when I read this is, when I'm reading this story, is that what the messages said verbatim? Or are they representing it in a certain way? They're paraphrasing it in a way that makes this writer's point. So we have, this is by Emma Ackerman, and I'm just going to go ahead and click the link because it's going to show me.
If you click it, it actually shows the other stories that she's written.
Mhm.
And I noticed that doesn't actually tell a little bio about her, but when I Googled other Vice News writers, they will come up with a page and a little bit of bio about them and kind of what their specialty is. So one person might write about crime regularly, another person might write about, political issues. And so they do have specialties sometimes. And sometimes you can just tell by the titles of the articles they've written.
Yeah, yeah. So it looks like, obviously election stuff, everybody's gonna be talking about election stuff. There is racial justice stuff. Let's see. Trailer park landlord allegedly threatened tenants with rent hike if Biden wins. So you're probably not getting another stimulus check anytime soon. So although, you know, this might not seem to have any obviously loaded language, there's a certain tone that you can read into these headlines that's telling us what Emma thinks about these events.
Well, and
I think
the picture that goes with it.
Yes, and the picture, very unflattering picture of Mitch McConnell here. The pictures are important, I think, especially when you see a news source about a certain person and there's a picture of that person. It's important to note, is it just your average like candid shot? Is it a shot that is not super flattering of them? And that can kind of tell you what this writer is feeling or thinking about this issue. We have the photo here is pretty, I would say, unbiased. I mean, it's pretty benign, right? It's pretty, here we're talking, it's an election day story. This is, you know, your average like stock election day photo. And so just glancing through this, even before we get into specifics, they on the right side here and also right here is related stories or more like this. There's something else I believe that Emma Ackerman wrote, but also it's very much a racial issue, why Georgia has slashed hundreds of polling places in the last 4 years. There is compulsory voting the fix for low voter turnout. The Trump campaign is trying to recruit ex-cops as poll challengers in Minnesota. Conservative scammers, Jacob Wall and Jack Berkman just turned themselves in for voter intimidation. So these headlines are a little bit more obviously opinionated, especially if you're talking about, if you're saying scammers, that's a very loaded term. It's an accusation. So now, even before we're getting into the article, but, you know, we're seeing, you know, related articles that are showing a little bit more bias. Oh, this is interesting. This ad, Stop the Spread of Anti-Asian Racism. It's a really big, really prominent ad. And so that, again, the fact that that's an ad on a very well-known news site, that somebody paid for that. Somebody paid for us to see this. And it is very large on the page. And somebody paid Vice to display it. And that Vice accepted that as an ad. And here we have AT&T TV. So AT&T is paying for this as well. But the fact that this video as an advertisement is something that is on Vice's site means that Vice at least accepts this as you know, an affiliate advertiser, along with AT&T and Larceny Bourbon, I guess.
So the next thing, you know, that we do when we're looking at articles like this is we start skimming a little bit, reading a little bit, trying to look for language that sounds loaded. And Avery's already pointed some of that out in some of the other titles that you see on this page. But here, you know, you've got officials in Michigan, Iowa, and Nebraska say robocallers are broadcasting false or misleading messages to voters, including some that say they should stay home on election day. And then they've actually got some quotes in here. So the Michigan Attorney General said multiple robocalls in Flint. And then they tell you, you know, about what else is being said there. One thing that this article does do is it doesn't have a bibliography at the end, but you can see the underlined phrases like on Twitter or 52.4%. And those are actually sources. They're leading you back to where they got that information from. So that's useful. I look for that as a librarian, that do they tell me where they got their information? So I'm happy to see that there is some work being done on that. So looking, at these, are we seeing a lot of loaded language, language that's trying to manipulate us or make us feel a certain way? And, so far in the body of this article, I feel like they're just reporting what's happening. I do think that the fact that they chose to report the article and the other articles on this page that are related show you that they do have kind of more of a liberal leaning, but they're basically, they're, writing the article, telling you what happened. They are using some quotes like, obviously this is false, all in capitals, and an effort to suppress the vote. No long lines, and today is the last day to vote. Don't believe the lies, have your voice heard. They chose to include that particular quote. So that also is telling to you, right? There may have been other quotes that they chose not to include, but this one is kind of alarmist. And so they're really wanting people to pay attention, to know that this is happening. And particularly if you live in those states, to not pay attention to these robocallers and to make sure you get out there and vote. So that's one thing that I do when I'm kind of looking through the text and I'm thinking about, what did they choose to put in? What might they have left out? Do they tell me where they got information from? What's kind of the overall picture here? What do they want me to feel or to do based on this article?
Something that I've seen news articles from any source do more and more is to embed or to quote tweets, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just depends on how they're used. If you're reporting on this is what this person said, or what people are seeing, and you're clear about the fact that these are just individuals, because social media is an individual's expression of their opinion. That's solely what social media is. And if it's a tweet that's just saying, this is what this person said, and there are also other sources that are more objective, then great. Biased sources don't necessarily mean you cannot use them, depending on what your teacher says, of course. Doesn't automatically mean that you cannot use them. But you have to be careful about how you're using them. And you have to pay attention to how the news sources are using them as well.
And I like this tweet here because they're actually saying, who this person is, and the person is in a position of authority. This is the Michigan Attorney General, and they are reporting what's happening in their state. And then they give the quote that this person who's the Attorney General tweeted out because they want people to see it right away. So Twitter is one immediate way that people get information. If you have to wait for a newspaper to be published and sent out the next morning, it's too late, right? So they need to use things like Facebook or Twitter to get that information out instantly, so people will still go vote while they can today.
Right. Oh yeah, so here are some more embedded tweets. This one is from the Michigan Attorney General. This is Michigan Secretary of State. So both figures of authority. And so this one is Nebraska Secretary of State. And so it seems like that the tweets that are being quoted here are from figures of authority. And figures of authority, most of the time, tweet about matters that are specifically related to their jobs.
In these cases, they do seem to be doing that.
Yeah, right. These are not like personal opinions tweets. These are informational tweets. So I feel like these tweets were well used by this Vice article. And they weren't used as mockery. They weren't used as, indicating any kind of extreme bias on the part of the Emma Ackerman who wrote this. It was just saying that this is what these figures of authority were saying on social media. So as I'm scrolling through here, I'm noticing some words like apparently, and then I think I saw allegedly, and that to me can indicate, there a lot of times news sources won't say anything is factual unless it's been proven beyond a doubt. They will say allegedly. For example, if somebody has allegedly committed a crime but has not been convicted, mostly news sources will say alleged, alleged perpetrator or, alleged criminal, whatever, in order to be clear that this person has not been proven to have done this thing. But these kinds of words can also be used kind of sarcastically. And it really just depends on the context. So we're going to move on to our second source, which is the National Review. And this site looks a little bit different. So at the very top here, we have donate, which I did not see with Vice. So that's interesting. We have the corner. And so although on Vice, we had the section about the 19th Amendment, we had the section about racial justice. When I clicked on the corner, I really couldn't figure out what it was.
Yeah, I looked at it too, and I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, so I get the sense that it is maybe editorials and opinion articles, but I'm not sure. It's hard to tell exactly what that is. So we have, trending topics, obviously the election. One thing that you can probably notice right off the bat is the many ads. There's things moving all over my screen here, which are distracting, and you will see this continue through the whole page.
It's hard to tell what's an ad and what's a story. Like that
is
that second one down there, that's a sponsored content, but is that a story underneath it? Or is that, it's just really hard to tell.
Yeah.
What that is.
Yeah, so we have one up here, one on the left, one on the right. We have two up here now. And then we'll have one down at the bottom. So if you don't have an ad blocker on, you're just going to be bombarded with advertisements, which to me doesn't seem very professional.
There's even one at the top, election
there
day
is
signal, 12 weeks of NRP plus.
Yeah.
I mean, geez.
It's just everywhere. Yeah. And websites have ads because they need to make money. That's fine. They need to pay the bills. But the fact that there are so many of them and I'm having to actually look for the news stories does not, it doesn't come off very good. So this site to me is less well designed because of these really irritating ads.
I wouldn't put up with it for very long. I would just give up on this as a news source and go find something else because I can't stand that kind of, constantly in my face kind of thing when I'm trying to do research.
Yeah, I don't want to have to sort through all of that to try and find news. So looking at the stories, seems like it's all, as I'm scrolling down, everything is about the election in some form or fashion. So although we do have presumably some worldwide news sources somewhere, I can't find them anymore. So one thing, here's a perfect example of a picture being used in a certain way. So we have a picture of Kamala Harris here. She's laughing. The title or the headline of the article is Kamala Harris's economic philosophy is no laughing matter. So this, to me, this photo is not being used in a flattering way. Although, it's a nice picture. She's smiling, she's laughing. This is meant to be critical of Kamala Harris. So that's already telling me that this news source or this article in particular is not happy with Kamala Harris and is sort of giving, there's a little bit of an ad hominem against her.
Right. And it's almost saying like, hey, she's laughing at you people. Are you going to let her get away with this? I mean, that's kind of the impression I get. Yeah,
definitely. So maybe in just a minute, we'll take a look at this article. So another thing that I'm noticing as I'm scrolling through here is not many people of color.
She was probably it, right?
Yeah, I think she was pretty much it. We have them in ads, but not represented in the thumbnails for the news story themselves. the only person of color that's actually featured in the article is in a critical, it's the picture is featured in a critical way, criticizing Kamala Harris, which to me does not come off very well either. Let's see. Let's take a look at their about section. Okay, so here's an old black and white photo. It's meant to show you that this news source is very old and presumably very esteemed, and there's a donkey. Deb, why is there a donkey?
Because the Democrat mascot is a donkey and the Republican one is an elephant.
It is so very interesting.
They're making fun. They got their national reviews and they're staring at this donkey, and it's kind of like I don't want to swear, but it's kind of like up yours to the Democrats, I think.
I think so too. At first I was like, why would they have the donkey, the symbol of the Democratic Party here on what is a magazine of conservative opinion? But I think you're right that that's meant to be kind of a mocking thing. So this right away is obviously a conservative source. They make no claim to be objective, politically objective. It is conservative. They're okay with that. It's a conservative organization. A couple of things that I noticed as I was reading through the about section. National Review employs the best and brightest minds in conservative letters. It's talking about conservative commentary. It's being very complimentary of itself. Through timely commentary from well-known financiers, economists, and entrepreneurs, business people, and other specialists. So it's really trying to hammer home the fact that these are credible people. They're well-known, not just credible, but well-known. And so the ethos or the feeling that they're meant to put off here is that if somebody is well-known, they must be credible. Alex Jones is well-known, but not many people would think that he's a credible or objective news source. There are many people that I'm sure that you can think of that are well-known that are not credible news sources, but that's kind of what they're hinting at here. So already I can tell that I am not the target audience for this news source. This would never show up in my social media or Facebook feed, at least probably not. So this is not, I can tell that this is not for me. Vice, I could tell was for me. It was, because I share values. I am not a politically conservative person. So I would not go out of my way to find this news source, nor would they, based on my browsing history or anything about, what I do on the internet, would they think that this news source would be for me. So I will just say, even before we get too far into this, that my bias is against this news source, because I am opposed. I'm socially, politically, culturally opposed to, the conservative viewpoint. So I even so, I try to take a step back from any news source that I look at. Even if I agree, maybe especially if I agree, if I'm reading Vice's news stories, I try to be just as critical of those stories as I would something from the National Review, because I try to keep that in check. I don't want to just blindly believe or trust everything that Vice says, and I don't want to automatically disbelieve anything that's reported by the National Review, and maybe reported in a way that I disagree with, but it still could be a valuable piece of information in some form or fashion.
Yeah, I agree. I do exactly the same thing. And I don't know if you talked about in your class about filter bubbles, but that idea that, we continue to see information because of how search algorithms work that is more along our own worldview. And we sometimes have to seek out opposing points of view and just, try to be critical of both and just not use confirmation bias all the time. Just because I think it's right, it's got to be right. And I think that's really important. But I would agree that, when I'm looking at this page compared to Vice, and again, this may have to do with my worldview, but this site seems more manipulative than the other one. I feel like the other one was at least trying a little bit harder to be more objective than this one. And even in their about area where they just proudly say, we are conservative, and they're very upfront about who they are. But it does seem, as we're going to get into it more, I just feel like they're trying to manipulate me a little bit more here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hate being manipulated by an information source. And there are liberal news sources, very liberal news sources that I will not read because they're very manipulative. They're clickbaity. And I hate that.
Yeah.
So again, that's me being critical. I don't like being manipulated. I am less likely to believe anything that you have to say if you are trying to emotionally manipulate me to believe your story.
Yeah.
And like, that's part of my worldview, but also I think it's a good practice to be very critical of any information source that you come across, especially one that you're unfamiliar with, to be very critical of it first. I do have my news sources that I generally trust and that I become less critical of over time because I have seen that they are relatively objective. And then I have news sources that I trust them to report on news, but I also recognize that they are part of my filter bubble. And that I kind of comfortably stay within my filter bubble confirmation bias stream of information on social media, and I'm okay with that. But if I'm doing something for work, or if I was doing something for school, I would be way more critical. So it really just depends. I don't think any teacher is going to ask you to just pick apart every single thing that you read, casual or not. But it is important to get some practice and to realize that your information stream, just based on what you do on the internet and just the nature of everything being connected on the internet, is filtered through that. And sometimes you have to go outside of that. And that's also not to say that you have to believe any of this. Look for multiple sources of information. And COVID is a really good example. Before most of us knew much about COVID at all, it was, how is it spread? Some sources were saying, like your breath and, your bodily fluids only. Some people were saying that through touch. Some people were saying, is it sexually transmitted? Is it, transmitted through breast milk? There was lots of information out there that was not necessarily credible. It was just, but it was spread. It was widespread. And so you needed to pick and choose your sources of information. And if it was, if I saw it from multiple sources of credible information, then I was more likely to believe it. But in a really rapidly changing situation like that, also recognizing that information can change over time, just based on what people know. The WHO and the CDC now have revised their some of their recommendations and what they say about COVID now, just based on the scientific information that they have so far in late 2020 versus early 2020. So information changes, and it's okay to change your mind about a source or about any information that you find based on new knowledge that you've gained. All right, so let's take a look at this article about Kamala Harris. Here we have more ads here. At least so far, there's only the one big one at the top. So we have this picture. Let's take a look at the stuff that's around the story again. We have top financial stories. So let's see, Oren class versus public choice economics. The median household will pay more under Biden-Harris tax plan. Again, this is directly aimed at conservative readers. So obviously, because of confirmation bias, a conservative reader who's reading this will probably be looking for reasons not to vote for Biden and Harris. So here's another reason, and it's kind of like this feel-good hormone. I believe that. Yeah, these people suck. And it's interesting. It was interesting to me on this website in general about the fact that it talks more about economics. Vice talks more about social issues. This is more, there are more stories here about economics. And that to me, it's a different type of news source, but also conservative voters and conservative readers, and I'm really overgeneralizing here. So just as a general statement, conservative readers, conservative voters in general do tend to pay more attention, I think, to economics, because that's part of the conservative viewpoint is being fiscally conservative, small government, deregulated economics. So it does not surprise me that there's a lot about economics on this site.
There also seems to be a slightly different, and again, I'm generalizing here too, but an age thing, because I think that we become more concerned about economic and our financial future as we get older. And I think that when we're younger, we're maybe more drawn to social justice issues and those kind of things.
So the first couple of lines of this article are a little bit different for me than the Vice stories. So let's see, from healthcare to the environment to housing, Harris thinks the answer to almost every problem we face is more government. So in general, the conservative viewpoint is less government is better. So small government, not big government. So that fits right in line with the conservative viewpoint of this news source. First sentence, during a 60 Minutes interview just over a week ago, Senator Kamala Harris was asked whether she would bring a, scare quotes, socialist perspective to a Biden administration. She laughed as if it were an absurd question. It's not. So socialist is one of those snarl words for conservative viewpoint. Socialism is a system of government. And, so like that in itself, like socialism is not bad, but a lot of conservative thinkers and a lot of conservative writers have used it as an accusation and an insult. Universal healthcare is socialist, so it must be bad. Bernie Sanders is a democratic socialist, and conservative writers and conservative pundits hate Bernie Sanders. So it's really meant to be an insult here. We're scrolling down. We're seeing lots of President Trump's face everywhere. We're seeing more on Kamala Harris. Here's something that's really interesting. Supporting Roe. This is Roe v. Wade that made abortion legal in the US in the 70s. Supporting Roe means supporting abortion until birth. There's some extreme language for you. And again, it is one of those shock value things where obviously that's not factual. Roe v. Wade has never been about supporting abortion until birth. It's one of those things that's meant to shock you. And it's one of those things that's meant not to be questioned. And if you're in this confirmation bias filter bubble of the National Review conservative thought, you're more likely to believe that statement or less likely to be critical of it and say, is that really true? So yeah, so paying attention to even just the stuff that's around the article, not even really the article, can give you a big clue about, this article may be relatively mild in terms of language, but the stuff that is around it isn't. So again, we have some quotes here, moderate and centrist, which are probably words that were actually used by the liberal media outlets, but they're using scare quotes here. They're using them as kind of allegedly moderate and centrist. And here we have loaded language, astounding. The word astounding is not objective at all. It is meant to mean incredibly surprising or like unbelievable. And $40 trillion is a lot of money. So they could have just said Harris supports a $40 trillion in new spending over the next decade. They didn't have to use the word astounding. And that really, to me, indicates that they're not really happy with Kamala Harris.
There's also the word inaccurately described at the beginning of that sentence.
Yes,
that clearly points to what you were saying about, if they say inaccurately described, then they're saying she's not a moderate and she's not a centrist. She's way far left. She's scary. You need to run screaming for the hills. I mean, that's what they're implying with this.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say again, like how distracting these ads are. The fact that I'm trying to read this small paragraph between this more on Kamala Harris thing and this really flashy video thing that currently is showing Joe Biden's face. I have it muted, so I don't know what it's saying, but you don't have to even turn on the sound to see like what exactly they're trying to get at when they're showing these this video. Let's see. Harris has abandoned the old Democratic Party lip service. So again, loaded language here. Lip service meaning talk but no action. Fiscal restraint. We think of restraint as a good thing. And fiscal restraint, again, we were talking about conservative thought in economics. Harris supported a federal government takeover of healthcare. Another, you think of takeover as, guys with pitchforks and torches.
Or guns in this case.
Or guns, yes. Let's see. Crippling the private sector.
Yeah.
There's no, I will say, restraint about objective language in this article. It's loaded language all over the place. You have no doubt what this news source's feelings are about Kamala Harris. And this is I'm noticing here too that this is a somewhat longer article than the Vice article, which is still true, I think, even with all the ads padding the page. And I kind of think that this has to do with the fact that this is the National Review is conservative commentary. So although they do report on current events, it is meant as commentary, and commentary meaning that they're not necessarily trying to be completely objective. So I accept that. I accept that I'm not their audience. They're not going to try and be objective. But even so, if I was looking at the National Review, it looks like any other news site. It doesn't say in, you really have to dig into the About section. You have to know to look there to find out that the National Review is commentary and not just news. So that, when you see commentary, there's nothing wrong with fact reporting and interpretation or commentary. There's lots of other sources that do that. But if those sources are your only sources of information, you really have to be careful to remember that this is commentary, not just fact reporting. And in fact, this is not really reporting anything that hasn't been reported elsewhere. The link here is meant to be a source that says supported a federal government takeover of healthcare. And this goes to the Wall Street Journal, which is not without bias, but it's a fairly objective news source. So I would actually love to click through here and see what this article actually is like.
And this is a plan to check your sources and see, where do they fall on the media bias chart and what is this article actually about? And then can you find other articles or news sources that talk about the same topic, and can you get different points of view or check what you're reading?
Mm-hmm. And so just reading the headline and the subtitle here, Kamala Harris unveils plan to transform healthcare to a federal system. The tone of that headline is really different. And then Democratic candidates' proposal would allow private insurers to offer Medicare Advantage plans. So what this actually is, it's not a federal takeover. It's linking private insurers with Medicare. So that, to me, that means that the National Review is really misrepresenting this article. Or, I think what they're doing is they're counting on the reader of that article to not bother to click the link or to see this article through that lens. If I'm a conservative reader, I'm already like, this is within my filter bubble. I'm within my confirmation bias, familiar, accepted place, in my comfort zone. And I'm reading this and I'm getting really mad about Kamala Harris and thinking, she's big government. She's all about, this federal takeover of healthcare. And I click the link, I see this article, and first thing in front of my face is Bernie Sanders, Medicare for All. My brain has already been trained by the dimension of socialism earlier to be mad about this. And so I may not even read past the headline. I might just take that as, yeah, this sucks. This is a really bad idea. And I may not even I may just think, I don't need to know anymore. I see Bernie Sanders, I'm going to connect it to Kamala Harris, I'm going to connect it to, this federal takeover. I'm automatically not going to want this. And so I'm not going to, chances are I'm going to be less likely to think closely about it. And that's just the way our brains work. That's not like a failing on your part. If this has ever happened to you, that's just, our brains are trying to be efficient in the way that we take in information. And we want, if we believe something, that's just kind of what we look for. And being constantly critical of every single thing that you read is tiring. So we all do it. We all look for reasons to be mad about something or reasons to believe it, depending on what our own worldview is. When I was looking at the National Review sites, I knew that I was going to get mad about what I read there, because I know that, I'm not a politically conservative person. In fact, I'm the very opposite of that. So I knew that I was going to get mad, and it didn't take me long to get mad about it. Likewise, if, a conservative person were looking at Vice, they might get mad at how they focus on social issues. They might think, oh God, have we not heard enough about this? The protests, and have we not heard enough about Black Lives Matter? Like, what does it matter? Women's voting rights, it's a thing. So, that's just kind of the way that people are. They look for things that they already agree with. And there's kind of a weird, satisfying thing about getting mad about something that you disagree with, because it's easy. So I guess my takeaway here is that everybody's got bias. It's neither a good nor a bad thing. But when you're reading information for the first time, be careful about where it's coming from. Make sure that you're looking for multiple sources, and be aware of the bias that the source that you're reading has. due diligence, look at the news source, especially if it's something that you're automatically like, yeah, this sounds great, or this makes me really mad. Then, maybe take a step back, look at the actual source, where does it fall on the media bias chart, do a little bit of Googling. And then, if you trust that source, then fine, like there's your trusted source of information, and that's okay. But learn to become a critical reader of media, especially like it is important. I think we think this every year, but it is more important now than it ever has been to be a critical consumer of media, just based on our current political and social climate. But also because, we're now kind of isolated from each other, and this is how we connect to each other online. And this is how we connect to the world. And so you have to just be careful about it and be critical of it.